The day Natalie Evans rode into Placerville, California, 3 men died in a mining accident, a fire consumed the mercantile, and a widow's only milk cow dropped dead in the street. Nobody had seen the young woman arrive, not exactly, but by sunset every soul in town had marked her presence and declared her the bearer of misfortune, a harbinger of tragedy wrapped in dusty calico and worn leather boots. It was the summer of 1876, and Placerville had already weathered enough hardship without adding a curse to the mix. The gold rush days had faded into memory, leaving behind a struggling community of stubborn folks who refused to abandon their claims and their dreams. The town clung to the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada, its wooden buildings pressed against hillsides scarred by decades of mining. What gold remained was hard-won, pulled from the earth by men whose backs bent a little more each year, whose hopes dimmed with each passing season. Natalie had not come seeking gold. She had come because she had nowhere else to go, because her aunt's letter 3 months prior had promised shelter and work at the boarding house on Main Street. But when she finally stood before the weathered building, carpetbag in hand and travel dust coating her dark hair, she found the windows dark and a black wreath hanging on the door. Her Aunt Margaret had passed 2 weeks earlier, according to the sour-faced woman who answered Natalie's tentative knock. "You must be the niece from back east," the woman said, looking Natalie up and down with undisguised suspicion. "You are too late. Margaret left no provisions for you in her affairs. The boarding house belongs to her creditors now." Natalie stood on that porch as the August sun beat down on her shoulders, feeling the weight of every mile she had traveled from Ohio. She was 22 years old, alone in a strange town, with $11 to her name and no prospects. Behind her, she heard shouting from down the street, saw smoke rising black and thick into the cloudless sky. The mercantile fire had just started, though she would not learn of it until later, would not know that people had already begun to associate her arrival with the day's calamities. She found a room at the smaller, shabbier boarding house on the edge of town, run by a nervous man named Mr. Chen, who seemed too desperate for the income to turn away a paying customer, curse or no curse. The room was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it had a door that locked and a window that caught the evening breeze. Natalie unpacked her few belongings, hung her 2 spare dresses on pegs, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to sit on the bed and feel the full weight of her circumstances before she straightened her spine and went out to find work. The first 3 establishments she entered fell silent at her appearance. The saloon keeper looked at her as though she had sprouted horns. The owner of the dry goods store made the sign of the cross. At the restaurant, the proprietor actually backed away from her, shaking his head before she could even speak. "We do not need help," he said firmly. "Best you move along." "I am a hard worker," Natalie said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I can cook, clean, keep books. I need very little in wages." "I said we do not need help. Go on now." She stood in the dusty street as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, watching people hurry past without meeting her eyes. A group of women gathered outside the church stopped their conversation to stare at her, their expressions ranging from fear to outright hostility. One of them pulled her young daughter closer, as if proximity to Natalie might somehow infect the child. That was when Natalie first saw Preston Walker. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed cutting, leading a limping horse down Main Street with the patient, gentle movements of a man who understood animals and their pain. He wore the practical clothes of a working ranch hand, his boots and gloves showing honest wear, his hat battered but serviceable. What struck her was not his appearance, though he was handsome in a rough-hewn way, but the fact that he looked at her without fear or suspicion, his gray eyes showing only polite curiosity. "That horse needs a farrier," Natalie said before she could think better of it, desperate for any interaction that did not involve condemnation. Preston stopped, glanced at his horse, then back at her. "Yes, madam, that is exactly where we are headed, through a shoe about 2 miles back." "The front left is tender too," Natalie observed, noting how the animal favored that leg. "Might be a stone bruise." He studied her with new interest. "You know horses. My father was a veterinarian. I grew up helping him." It was the first time she had spoken of her father in months, since his death had left her alone in the world except for the aunt she had never met. "Preston Walker," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "I work at the W Ranch about 5 miles north of town. Natalie Evans." She waited for the recognition, the sudden cooling of his expression, but it did not come. Perhaps he had been out at the ranch all day, had not yet heard about the cursed woman who brought tragedy to Placerville. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Evans. You are new to town. I arrived today." "Well, welcome to Placerville." His smile was genuine, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "It is a good town, mostly. People here work hard and look after each other." Natalie glanced at the women outside the church, who were still watching her with cold eyes. "That has not been my experience so far." Preston followed her gaze, and something in his expression shifted, a flicker of understanding. "Give them time," he said quietly. "Folks around here have been through a lot. Sometimes that makes people cautious with strangers." It was a kindness, that generous interpretation, and Natalie felt something in her chest loosen slightly. "Thank you for saying so. You looking for work?" The question surprised her. "Yes, actually. Do you know of anything?" Preston was quiet for a moment, considering. "The ranch owner, Mr. William Wallace, he is my uncle. His wife passed last year and the house has been falling into disarray. He could use someone to help with the cooking and cleaning. Cannot promise anything, but I could ask him if you like." Hope flared so suddenly it hurt. "I would appreciate that very much. Come by tomorrow morning if you are willing to make the ride out. Anyone in town can point you toward the W." He tipped his hat again. "I had better get this fellow to the farrier before he closes up shop. Good evening, Miss Evans." "Good evening, Mr. Walker." She watched him continue down the street, murmuring soft words to his injured horse, and felt the first small warmth she had experienced since arriving in this hard, unwelcoming town. That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Placerville settling into darkness, Natalie allowed herself to hope that perhaps tomorrow would be better. She did not yet know about the mining accident, about the 3 men who had died when a shaft collapsed. She did not know that people were already calling her cursed, that her name was being spoken in frightened whispers in the saloons and around dinner tables. She did not know that the woman whose cow had died had actually seen Natalie walking past just moments before the animal fell, and was telling everyone who would listen about the evil eye the stranger had cast upon her livestock. All she knew was that a kind man with gray eyes had spoken to her without suspicion, had offered help without expectation, and that tomorrow she would ride out to the W Ranch and try to build some small piece of a life in this unforgiving place. She woke before dawn, washed with cold water from the basin, and dressed in her least worn dress, a simple brown cotton that had been patched but was still respectable. Mr. Chen's wife sold her a biscuit and some dried apples for breakfast, barely speaking, her eyes averted. Natalie ate quickly and asked about hiring a horse. "The livery stable," Mrs. Chen said shortly, pointing north. The livery was run by a grizzled man named Thompson who looked at Natalie's money with more warmth than he looked at her face. He rented her a docile mare, gave her directions to the Double W, and warned her to have the horse back by sunset or pay for an extra day. The ride out of town was beautiful despite her anxiety. The morning air was cool and clean, scented with pine and earth. The road wound through stands of oak and pine, climbing gradually into the foothills. Wildflowers bloomed in patches of sunlight, purple and gold against the green. In the distance, the Sierra Nevada mountains rose magnificent and imposing, their highest peaks still holding snow even in summer. The Double W Ranch sprawled across a wide valley, with grazing land spreading between stands of trees and a creek running silver through the property. The main house was solidly built, larger than Natalie had expected, with a wide porch and stone chimney. Beyond it stood a barn, a bunkhouse, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the pastures, and she could see several men working with horses in a distant corral. Preston was waiting on the porch as she rode up, as if he had been watching for her. He helped her dismount with courteous efficiency. "Good morning, Miss Evans. I am glad you came. I spoke with my uncle last night and he is willing to meet with you. Thank you for arranging it. I should mention something before we go in." Preston's expression grew serious. "There was talk in town last night. Foolish talk, superstitious nonsense, but I wanted you to hear it from me rather than be blindsided. Some people are saying you brought bad luck to Placerville, that yesterday's troubles were somehow your fault." Natalie's heart sank. So it had already begun. "I see. My uncle is not a superstitious man," Preston continued. "Neither am I. We judge people by their character and their work, nothing else. But I thought you should know what you might be facing. I appreciate your honesty." She met his eyes directly. "For the record, I had nothing to do with any accidents or fires. I simply arrived in town at an unfortunate time." "I believe you," Preston said simply, and the matter-of-fact way he said it made her throat tight with gratitude. William Wallace was a bear of a man, broad-shouldered and bearded, with keen blue eyes that studied Natalie with frank assessment. His office was cluttered with ranch records, maps of the property, and the accumulated paperwork of running a cattle operation. He gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. "Preston tells me you are looking for work, and that you know your way around animals." "Yes, sir. My father was a veterinarian in Ohio. I assisted him from the time I was old enough to be useful. I can also cook, clean, and manage household accounts." "Can you ride?" "Yes, sir. Handle a rifle, if I needed to, though I would prefer not to." A ghost of a smile crossed William's weathered face. "Fair enough. I will be straight with you, Miss Evans. This house has been falling apart since my wife died. The hands get fed, but barely. The place needs a woman's hand, someone to bring some order to the chaos. But I have also heard the talk from town, and I will not lie to you. Having you here might make some of my dealings with Placerville folk more difficult." Natalie lifted her chin. "I understand, sir, but I can promise you this. I am a hard worker, I am honest, and I am desperate enough to prove myself that you will get better value from me than from any other person you might hire." William studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, Miss Evans, I will give you a trial period. 2 weeks. You will have a room in the main house, meals, and $5 a week. At the end of 2 weeks, we will both decide if this arrangement suits us." "Fair." "More than fair, sir. Thank you. Preston will show you around, get you settled. You can start tomorrow if that works for you." "I can start today if you prefer." Another almost smile. "Today is fine. Welcome to the Double W, Miss Evans." Preston showed her through the house, which was indeed in need of attention. Dust covered most surfaces. Dishes were piled in the kitchen, and the floors had not seen a proper cleaning in what looked like months. But the bones of the place were good, with solid furniture and large windows that let in plenty of light. "The ranch hands eat breakfast at 5 and dinner at 6, Preston explained as they walked. "Lunch they usually take out on the range. Uncle William is not particular about what you cook, as long as there is plenty of it and it is hot. There are 5 regular hands plus myself, and sometimes we have extra help during roundup or branding season. And your uncle, he lives here alone now." "Yes, my Aunt Clara died 14 months ago. Cancer. It was hard on him." Preston's voice was soft with memory. "She was a wonderful woman, always singing, always making this place feel like home. Since she passed, Uncle William has just been going through the motions." They climbed the stairs to the second floor, where Preston showed her to a corner bedroom with a view of the mountains. It was simply furnished but clean, with a real bed, a dresser, and even a small desk by the window. "This was my aunt's sewing room," Preston said. "I cleaned it out yesterday, thought it would make a good bedroom for you, better than the room downstairs by the kitchen." Natalie looked at the space, at the beautiful view, at the handmade quilt on the bed, and felt tears prick her eyes. After the hostility in town, after the tiny, dim room at Mr. Chen's boarding house, this felt like luxury beyond measure. "It is perfect," she managed. "Thank you. I will ride back to town with you to get your things if you like. Should not take long." The trip back to town was different with Preston at her side. People still stared, still whispered, but they did not approach. Natalie packed up her few belongings, paid Mr. Chen for the single night she had stayed, and endured Mrs. Chen's disapproving silence. As they prepared to leave, the woman finally spoke. "You should not have come here," she said quietly, not unkindly. "This town has suffered enough without a curse walking its streets." "I am not a curse," Natalie said firmly. "I am just a woman looking for a place to live and honest work." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Perhaps you do not know what you are, but the dead men's families, they know. The burned-out shopkeeper, he knows. You should leave before more harm comes." Preston stepped forward, his voice hard. "That is enough, Mrs. Chen. Miss Evans had nothing to do with those tragedies, and it is shameful to suggest otherwise." They rode back to the ranch in silence, but halfway there, Preston spoke. "Do not let them get to you. Fear makes people cruel, makes them look for someone to blame when bad things happen." "Have there been many bad things? Before I arrived, I mean." Preston was quiet for a moment. "The town has been struggling, yes. The easy gold is long gone, and what is left is dangerous to mine. We have had accidents, failed businesses, hard winters. But that is life on the frontier, not a curse." "Why do you believe me?" Natalie asked. "You do not know me at all." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his gray eyes that made her breath catch. "I am a good judge of character, Miss Evans. I see how you sit a horse, how you speak, how you carry yourself. You are educated, well-raised, and you are grieving something. But there is no darkness in you, no malice. Anyone with eyes to see could tell that." "Thank you," she whispered, not trusting herself to say more. That afternoon, Natalie threw herself into work. She swept and scrubbed the kitchen until it gleamed, organized the pantry, and took inventory of supplies. When the hands came in for dinner, she had a simple but hearty meal ready. Beef stew, fresh bread that she had managed to bake in the temperamental oven, and canned peaches for dessert. The ranch hands were wary at first, having heard the talk from town, but good food and clean plates went a long way toward winning them over. William ate 3 bowls of stew and actually complimented her bread. Preston caught her eye across the table and smiled, a warm, genuine expression that made her feel, for the first time in a very long time, like she might actually belong somewhere. Over the next several days, Natalie settled into the rhythms of ranch life. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, spent her days cleaning and organizing the neglected house, and prepared large dinners for hungry men who gradually grew comfortable with her presence. In the evenings, she often sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains, marveling at the wild beauty of this place that had rejected her, but that she was slowly coming to love. Preston was often around the main house, always seeming to have some legitimate reason to stop by. He would bring her fresh eggs from the henhouse, or offer to help move heavy furniture when she was cleaning, or simply sit on the porch steps in the evening and talk with her about the ranch, the land, his life. She learned that he was 26 years old, that he had come to California from Texas 5 years earlier, that his parents had both died in a cholera outbreak when he was 19. William was his mother's brother, the only family Preston had left. He had started as a regular ranch hand and worked his way up to foreman through competence and dedication. "You ever think about having your own place?" Natalie asked one evening as they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Sometimes," Preston admitted, "but I am happy here. Uncle William has been good to me, and this land, this valley, it feels like home now. I understand that. The feeling of home, I mean, or I used to." Natalie wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly chilled despite the warm evening. "I have not felt it in a long time. What happened?" "If you do not mind me asking." She told him then, about her father's death from pneumonia the previous winter, about the debts she had discovered afterward, about selling everything to pay his creditors and writing to her Aunt Margaret in desperation. About the long journey west, her hopes for a new beginning, and the devastating discovery that her aunt had died before she arrived. "I am sorry," Preston said quietly. "That is a lot of loss for one person to bear. I keep thinking I should have come sooner. If I had left Ohio right after my father died, instead of spending months trying to settle his affairs, I might have made it here in time. My aunt might not have died alone. Or you might have gotten sick too, whatever took her. You cannot think that way, Natalie. You made the best decisions you could with the information you had." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his low, gentle voice made something flutter in her chest. She realized she liked the sound of it, liked the casual intimacy it implied. "You can call me Preston," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "No need for formality between friends. Are we friends?" He looked at her, his eyes serious in the twilight. "I hope so." 2 weeks passed, and William called Natalie into his office on a Saturday morning. She stood before his desk, trying to read his expression, hoping desperately that he would let her stay. "Well, Miss Evans, your trial period is up. I suppose we should discuss whether this arrangement is working." "I hope it is, sir. I have tried my best to be useful." "Tried your best?" William's eyebrows rose. "Young woman, this house has not been this clean or well organized since my Clara died. The men are actually looking forward to meals instead of just shoveling down food to fuel their work. You fixed that temperamental pump in the kitchen that had been giving us trouble for months. And Preston tells me you helped birth a calf last night when one of the heifers was struggling." Natalie had indeed spent half the previous night in the barn with Preston, helping a first-time mother through a difficult delivery. They had worked together in quiet coordination, and when the calf finally arrived, healthy and bawling, Preston had looked at her with such warmth and admiration that she had felt it like sunlight on her skin. "I am glad I could help," she said. "Help? You saved that calf's life and probably the mother too." "No, Miss Evans, you have more than proven yourself. If you are willing, I would like to make your position here permanent. I will raise your wages to $7 a week, and I want you to feel free to make any changes to the house that you see fit. It is your domain now." The relief was so intense that Natalie had to sit down. "Thank you, Mr. Wallace. You do not know what this means to me. I think I do." "And I should thank you, Natalie. May I call you Natalie?" At her nod, he continued, "You have brought life back to this house. My Clara would have liked you very much." That afternoon, Natalie rode into Placerville to buy supplies for the ranch, a task she had been avoiding but could not put off any longer. The reception was as cold as she had feared. People stepped aside as she walked down the boardwalk, as if she might contaminate them. The clerk at the dry goods store served her but would not meet her eyes. When she stopped at the post office to send a letter to a friend back in Ohio, the postmaster actually made the sign of the cross. She was loading her purchases into the wagon when she heard raised voices nearby. A small crowd had gathered outside the doctor's office, and she could hear angry shouting. 3 more men hurt in the mines today, and for what? That cursed woman is still here, still bringing misery to this town. Someone should run her out before she kills us all. Natalie's blood ran cold. She quickly finished loading the wagon, desperate to leave before the crowd noticed her. But as she climbed onto the seat, a rock sailed past her head, missing her by inches. She turned to see who had thrown it and found herself facing a knot of angry men, their faces twisted with fear and hatred. "There she is, the curse. Go back where you came from." Another rock flew, this one striking the wagon beside her. The horses began to dance nervously, and Natalie grabbed the reins, trying to control them while more people joined the crowd. She saw women she had passed on the street, men from the saloon, even the reverend from the church. Their anger was a palpable thing, a force that made the air feel thick and dangerous. "Please," she called out, hating the tremor in her voice. "I have done nothing to hurt anyone. I am just trying to live my life." "Your life is a curse on this town," someone shouted. A larger rock hit the wagon bed with a loud thunk, and the horses began to panic. Natalie struggled with the reins, knowing that if the animals bolted in this crowded street, someone could be seriously hurt. The crowd pressed closer, and she saw more people picking up stones, saw the mob mentality taking hold. Then Preston was there, riding his horse between Natalie and the crowd, his face set in hard, angry lines. "That is enough." His voice cracked like a whip, cutting through the shouts. "All of you back away from her right now. She is a curse, Walker. You know it as well as we do." Preston dismounted in one fluid motion, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. Natalie had never seen him like this, coiled and dangerous, every inch the frontier man who knew how to handle violence. "Natalie Evans is a hard-working woman who has done nothing to any of you. The mining accidents, the fires, the bad luck, none of it has anything to do with her. You are acting like superstitious fools, and you should all be ashamed of yourselves." "Easy for you to say," someone called out. "She is not cursing you up at that ranch. Actually, since she arrived at the Double W, we have had our best month in over a year. Calving season went perfectly, we have not lost a single head of cattle, and that temperamental well that kept running dry has been flowing strong. So if she is a curse, she is a damn poor one." The crowd wavered, uncertain. Preston pressed his advantage. "You want someone to blame for your troubles. Blame the mining company that cuts corners on safety. Blame the dry conditions that made that fire spread so fast. Blame bad luck, because that is what it is. But do not blame an innocent woman just because you need a scapegoat for your fear." The Reverend stepped forward, his expression troubled. "Preston, you are a good man, but you do not understand. There are forces at work in this world that we cannot see, and sometimes people carry darkness without knowing it. Reverend, with all due respect, the only darkness I see here is in a crowd of grown adults terrorizing a woman who has done nothing wrong. Where in Scripture does it say to throw rocks at strangers, to judge someone without cause? Natalie Evans is a good Christian woman who has shown more grace and courage in the face of your cruelty than any of you deserve." Natalie felt tears streaming down her face, though she could not have said when she started crying. No one had ever defended her like this, with such fierce conviction. Preston's words were not just protection but validation, a public declaration that she was worth defending. The crowd began to disperse, shame-faced and muttering. The Reverend looked at Natalie for a long moment, then tipped his hat and walked away without another word. Within minutes, the street was clear except for Natalie in her wagon and Preston standing beside his horse, the tension slowly draining from his shoulders. He looked up at her, his expression softening. "Are you hurt?" Natalie shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Come on, let us get you home." He tied his horse to the back of the wagon and climbed up beside her, taking the reins from her shaking hands. They rode out of Placerville in silence, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the road. Halfway back to the ranch, Preston pulled the wagon to a stop beside the creek that ran parallel to the road. "We should let the horses drink," he said, but Natalie knew that was not the real reason. They sat on a fallen log beside the water while the horses grazed nearby. Natalie had stopped crying, but she felt hollowed out, exhausted by fear and anger and unwanted confrontation. "I cannot keep doing this," she said quietly. "I cannot keep living somewhere I am hated, where my presence causes trouble. Maybe I should leave, go somewhere else, start over again." "Is that what you want?" Preston asked. "No, but what I want does not seem to matter much. It matters to me." She looked at him, found him already watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Natalie, I have to tell you something, and I am going to make a mess of it because I have never been good with words. But I cannot keep pretending I feel about you the way I feel about everyone else." Her breath caught. "Preston, from the first day I met you, I saw something in you. Strength, kindness, grace under pressure. The way you handled that hostile town, the way you threw yourself into work at the ranch, the way you sat up all night helping birth a calf even though you were exhausted. You are remarkable, and every day I find new reasons to admire you. You barely know me. I know enough. I know that you make me want to be better, do better. I know that I look forward to seeing you every morning and that I make excuses to be near you. I know that watching that crowd threaten you today made me angrier than I have ever been in my life." Natalie's hands were trembling. "I do not know what to say. Say you will stay. Say you will not let those frightened fools chase you away." Preston took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. "Say that maybe someday you might feel about me the way I am starting to feel about you." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, at the hope and vulnerability written there. This man had defended her, believed in her, seen her worth when everyone else saw only something to fear. He was good and kind and brave, and when he looked at her, she felt like someone worth being, someone worth knowing. "I will stay," she whispered. "And Preston, I already do. Feel that way about you, I mean." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, transforming him from handsome to beautiful. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles with old-fashioned gallantry, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then we are going to be just fine, you and I." They sat by the creek until the shadows grew long, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other in the way of new couples everywhere. Preston told her about growing up in Texas, about the wide open spaces and the cattle drives, about losing his parents and finding a new home with his uncle. Natalie told him about Ohio, about helping her father with sick animals, about the books she loved to read and her secret ambition to maybe, someday, write stories of her own. When they finally returned to the ranch, William took one look at their faces and said nothing, but Natalie caught the pleased gleam in his eye. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Natalie's life. She and Preston did not hide their growing affection from the ranch hands or William, though they maintained propriety in their interactions. But everyone could see the way Preston found reasons to be near her, the way their eyes met across the dinner table, the way they talked quietly on the porch in the evenings while the stars wheeled overhead. Natalie still could not go to town without facing hostility, but it mattered less now. She had Preston, she had William, she had the ranch hands who had come to respect and like her. She had meaningful work and a beautiful place to call home. The opinion of frightened strangers seemed less important when weighed against the regard of people who truly knew her. One evening in early October, as the leaves on the oaks turned gold and the air carried the first hints of autumn, Preston asked Natalie to ride out with him to check on some cattle in the far pasture. It was a task that needed doing, but it was also clearly an excuse to be alone together away from the ranch. They rode through the golden afternoon, talking companionably, enjoying the beauty of the season. The cattle were fine, grazing peacefully near the creek. Preston and Natalie sat on a boulder overlooking the valley, the ranch visible in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney. "I love this view," Natalie said. "I never get tired of looking at these mountains." "I wanted to bring you here for a reason," Preston said, and something in his voice made her turn to look at him fully. He slid off the boulder and, to her shock, dropped to one knee before her. "Natalie Evans, I am not a rich man, and I am not much good at pretty words. But I love you with everything I have, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He produced a simple gold band from his pocket, and Natalie saw that his hands were shaking slightly. This strong, capable man was nervous asking her to marry him, and the realization made her love him even more. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face again, but happy tears this time. "Yes, of course I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with gentle passion while the sun set fire to the mountains around them. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Preston pressed his forehead to hers. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this," he promised. "I know you will." They rode back to the ranch in the twilight, hands clasped between their horses, both grinning like fools. William greeted the news with genuine joy, embracing Natalie and telling Preston he was a lucky man. The ranch hands cheered and demanded a celebration, so Natalie raided the pantry and put together an impromptu feast while someone produced a bottle of whiskey that had been saved for special occasions. They were married a month later, in November of 1876, in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Natalie had hoped they might marry in town, in the pretty white church, but she knew that was impossible given the town's feelings about her. Instead, they stood in the ranch house parlor, which Natalie had decorated with late-season wildflowers and golden oak leaves. William gave her away, and the ranch hands served as witnesses. A circuit preacher who came through the area monthly performed the ceremony, a kind old man who did not seem to care about curses or superstitions. Natalie wore a dress she had made herself from fabric William had bought her as an early wedding present, a lovely deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Preston wore his best shirt and a new vest, his hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. When he saw her walking toward him, his eyes went bright with emotion. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Natalie felt her heart swell with happiness. They exchanged vows in the traditional way, Preston's voice strong and sure, Natalie's steady despite her tears. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her with such tenderness that several of the ranch hands had to look away, moved by the obvious depth of feeling between the newlyweds. The celebration that followed was joyful and rowdy, with food and music and dancing in the cleared barn. Someone had a fiddle, and the ranch hands took turns spinning Natalie around the floor until Preston finally reclaimed her, pulling her close and swaying with her to a slow, sweet tune. "Happy, Mrs. Walker," he murmured against her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible, Mr. Walker." They spent their wedding night in the main house, in the large bedroom that had been William's but that he had quietly moved out of, insisting the newlyweds should have the nicest room. Preston carried Natalie over the threshold with old-fashioned ceremony, and they loved each other with gentle passion, learning each other's bodies with the same care and attention they had used to learn each other's hearts. Afterward, lying in Preston's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow and steady beneath her ear, Natalie marveled at how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been alone and desperate, arriving in a town that hated her. Now she was married to a wonderful man, living in a beautiful place, surrounded by people who cared for her. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I am blessed," Natalie said. "The town called me cursed, but you called me blessed, and you made me your wife. That makes me the luckiest woman in California." Preston kissed the top of her head. "I am the lucky one, Natalie. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Winter came to the Sierra Nevada foothills, bringing cold rains and even some snow to the higher elevations. The ranch settled into the quieter rhythms of the off-season, with the cattle brought to lower pastures and the hands focusing on maintenance and repairs. Natalie threw herself into making the house a true home, sewing curtains for the windows, braiding rugs for the floors, and cooking hearty meals that kept everyone warm and well-fed through the cold months. She and Preston had moved into the small cabin that stood about 100 yards from the main house, a 2-room structure that had been used for storage, but that they had cleaned and furnished into a cozy home of their own. It gave them privacy while keeping them close to the ranch operations. Natalie loved their little cabin, loved the intimacy of sharing such close quarters with her husband, loved waking up warm in his arms while frost painted patterns on the windows. In late January, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be sure before telling Preston. She chose a quiet evening when they were alone in the cabin, Preston reading by lamplight while she worked on some mending. "Preston, I have something to tell you." He looked up from his book, immediately attentive. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine, actually. I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Preston just stared at her, processing the information. Then his face transformed with joy, and he crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees before her chair and pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "A baby," he breathed. "Natalie, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, running her fingers through his hair. He looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. I love you so much, and now we are going to have a child. Our child." They held each other for a long time, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. They talked late into the night about names and the future, about whether the baby would have Natalie's dark hair or Preston's gray eyes, about all the ways their lives were about to change. William was delighted by the news, insisting that Natalie should not overwork herself and that he would hire additional help for the house if needed. The ranch hands were congratulatory and protective, treating Natalie like precious cargo. It was touching, if occasionally excessive. As winter gave way to spring, Natalie's pregnancy began to show. She felt healthy and strong, experiencing only mild morning sickness and maintaining her energy throughout the day. Preston was endlessly solicitous, bringing her water, helping her with tasks she could have easily managed herself, and generally treating her like she might break at any moment. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she teased one day when he tried to carry a perfectly manageable basket of laundry for her. "I know, but I want to take care of you," Preston said. "Is that so wrong?" "Not wrong, just unnecessary. I am perfectly capable. I know you are. You are capable of anything you set your mind to, but let me do this for you anyway. It makes me feel useful." She kissed him then, standing on tiptoe to reach his lips despite her growing belly. "You are the best husband a woman could ask for." In April, Natalie had to go to town for supplies, something she had been avoiding but could no longer put off. Preston insisted on accompanying her, and they rode into Placerville on a bright spring morning. The reception was different this time. People still stared, but the hostility seemed to have faded somewhat. Several people actually nodded to them in greeting. At the dry goods store, the clerk congratulated them on their marriage and impending parenthood, having heard the news through the frontier grapevine that connected isolated ranches and towns. As they were loading their purchases into the wagon, a woman approached them. She was middle-aged, well-dressed, with graying hair and kind eyes. "Excuse me, are you Natalie Walker?" Natalie tensed, prepared for confrontation, but the woman's expression was friendly. "Yes, madam. I am Constance Miller. My husband runs the lumber mill. I wanted to apologize to you." "Apologize?" Natalie echoed, confused, "for how this town treated you when you first arrived. It was shameful, the way we blamed you for things that had nothing to do with you. Fear makes people cruel, but that is no excuse." Constance looked genuinely remorseful. "I was one of those people, one of the ones who whispered about curses and bad luck. I am ashamed of myself, and I wanted you to know that." Natalie was so surprised she did not know what to say. Preston squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Why the change of heart?" Natalie finally asked. "Because I started paying attention to facts instead of fear," Constance said. "The accidents and troubles did not stop when you left town to live at the ranch. If anything, things have been slowly getting better. The new safety measures at the mine have prevented further deaths. The rebuilt mercantile is doing good business. We had a mild winter with no major losses. Life goes on, as it always does, with its mix of good and bad. You were never the cause of anything, and I am sorry it took me so long to see that." "Thank you," Natalie said quietly. "That means more than you know." Other people began to approach, offering similar apologies or at least civil greetings. It seemed that time and the obvious happiness of Natalie and Preston had softened the town's stance. By the time they left Placerville, Natalie felt lighter than she had in months. "See," Preston said as they rode home, "I told you they would come around eventually. You did. Though I think it helped that we stayed away and let them miss having something to blame for their troubles. Maybe. Or maybe they just realized what I knew from the start, that you are a good person who deserves kindness." Their son was born on a warm day in early September of 1877, after a long but uncomplicated labor. Preston paced the main house while William sat calmly reading, pretending not to notice his nephew's anxiety. The local midwife, a practical woman named Mrs. Anderson who had delivered half the babies in the county, worked with Natalie in the cabin. When Preston finally heard the babies cry, he ran across the yard so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. Mrs. Anderson met him at the door with a smile. "You have a healthy son, Mr. Walker. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a good set of lungs on him." Preston entered the cabin to find Natalie propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she said. Preston approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby had dark hair like Natalie and was beautiful in the way all newborns are beautiful to their parents. Preston felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost painful. "He is perfect," Preston whispered. "You are both perfect." They named him Samuel William Walker, Samuel after Preston's father and William after his uncle who had given them both so much. Little Samuel proved to be a good baby, healthy and content, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's determined chin. William doted on his great-nephew, spending hours rocking the baby and telling him stories about the ranch and the land. The hands made toys and carved rattles, competing to make Samuel smile. Natalie recovered quickly from the birth and settled into motherhood with the same competence and grace she brought to everything else. Preston was a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel when he fussed, changing his nappies without complaint, and staring at his son with an expression of wonder that made Natalie fall in love with him all over again. In December, when Samuel was 3 months old, the family made a trip to Placerville for the Christmas festivities. The town had fully accepted Natalie by this point, with several women calling on her at the ranch to welcome her properly to the community and apologize for their previous behavior. The Christmas celebration was held in the church, which had been decorated with evergreen boughs and candles. Natalie stood with her husband and son, singing carols alongside people who had once called her cursed, and marveled at how completely things had changed. The Reverend, the same one who had questioned Preston's defense of her, sought her out after the service. "Mrs. Walker, I owe you an apology. I let fear override faith, and I am sorry for it. You and your family are welcome in this church anytime." "Thank you, Reverend. That means a great deal." As they walked back to the wagon through the softly falling snow, Natalie looked at her husband carrying their son, at the friendly faces calling out holiday greetings, at the lights glowing warmly in windows along Main Street. "Happy?" Preston asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. "Happier than I can say," Natalie replied. "The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under William's leadership and Preston's capable management. They had good years for calving, fair prices for their beef, and enough rain to keep the grass growing without flooding. In 1879, Natalie gave birth to twin daughters, Lucy and Sarah, identical little girls with their father's gray eyes and sunny dispositions. William, now in his 60s, gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Preston, training him to eventually take over completely. In the spring of 1881, William sat Preston and Natalie down in his office for a serious talk. "I am getting older," he said bluntly, "and I have been thinking about the future. This ranch has been my life's work, but it is time to start thinking about what comes next." "Uncle William, you have plenty of good years left," Preston protested. "Maybe, maybe not. Either way, I want to make my intentions clear. When I die, I want this ranch to go to you, Preston, to you and Natalie and your children. You have earned it 100 times over, and I can think of no one I would rather see carrying on this legacy." Preston was visibly moved. "Uncle William, I do not know what to say. Say you will accept it. Say you will keep this place running and teach your children to love it the way we do." "Of course we will," Natalie said, taking William's weathered hand in hers. "And we will make sure Samuel and the girls know what an incredible man their great-uncle was." William lived 7 more years, long enough to see Preston fully established as the ranch owner, long enough to watch Samuel grow into a responsible young boy who loved horses and the land, long enough to see Natalie fully integrated into the community, known now as one of the finest women in the county, a far cry from the cursed stranger who had arrived 13 years earlier. He died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1888, and half the county turned out for his funeral. He was buried next to his beloved Clara on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and Preston made sure the spot was always tended, always marked with fresh flowers. With William's passing, the ranch officially became the Walker property, though it had functioned that way for years. Preston proved to be an excellent rancher, combining his uncle's wisdom with his own innovations. Natalie managed the household and the accounts, raised their children, and became known throughout the region for her kindness and good sense. In 1890, Natalie gave birth to their fourth child, another son they named Robert. He was a surprise, coming several years after the twins, but a welcome one. By then, Samuel was 13 and already working alongside his father, learning the skills he would need to run the ranch someday. The twins, at 11, were bright and curious girls who loved school and books almost as much as they loved riding. Natalie was 41 now, no longer the frightened young woman who had arrived in Placerville with $11 and no prospects. She was confident, respected, deeply loved. When she went to town, people greeted her warmly, asked about her family, sought her advice on everything from cooking to child rearing. One day, standing in the dry goods store, Natalie overheard two young women talking. "Is that Natalie Walker?" one whispered to the other. "Yes, the rancher's wife. She is wonderful, everyone says so, kind and smart and such a good mother. I heard she had a difficult time when she first came to town. Ancient history. She has been here forever practically, cannot imagine Placerville without her." Natalie smiled to herself, remembering the girl she had been, the way this town had rejected her, the fear and loneliness of those early days. It seemed like another lifetime, another person entirely. That evening, sitting on the porch of the cabin she and Preston still shared, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Natalie reflected on her life. Preston sat beside her, his hand resting on hers, both of them enjoying a rare moment of quiet before their children descended demanding dinner or attention or help with some crisis or another. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked. "About how strange life is. How it can change so completely when you least expect it." "You mean how you went from cursed stranger to beloved wife and mother? Something like that. Do you ever think about that first day we met? When you were walking your horse to the farrier, and I was so desperate for any kindness that I talked to a complete stranger." "I think about it all the time," Preston said. "I think about how lucky I was that my horse threw that shoe, that I happened to be walking down that street at exactly the right time to meet you." "The town called me cursed," Natalie said softly, "but you called me blessed. You are blessed. We both are." Preston lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "And I would do it all again, every moment, just to end up right here with you." From inside the cabin, they heard little Robert crying for his mother and the twins arguing about something inconsequential. Samuel's voice rose above the chaos, trying to restore order. Preston and Natalie shared a look of amused resignation. "Duty calls," Natalie said, standing. "Our blessed, chaotic, perfect life," Preston agreed, following her inside. As Natalie tended to her children, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror over the washstand. She had gray threading through her dark hair now, lines around her eyes from years of sun and laughter. She looked happy, she realized. She looked like a woman who had found her place in the world, who had built a life worth living despite the obstacles thrown in her path. The years continued to roll past with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Seasons turned, children grew, cattle were born and sold and replaced. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the county. Preston's reputation grew as well, and he was frequently consulted on ranching matters by neighbors and other cattle operations. In In 1895, when Samuel was 18, he married a sweet girl from town named Margaret, and Preston built them a small house on ranch property. The following year, Margaret gave birth to Natalie's first grandchild, a little girl they named Clara after William's late wife. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Natalie felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that was both humbling and profound. The twins, Lucy and Sarah, proved to have no interest in ranch life. Both were academically inclined, and with Natalie's encouragement and Preston's financial support, they went to a ladies' seminary in San Francisco, returning home with teaching certificates and modern ideas that sometimes scandalized the more traditional folks in Placerville. Lucy eventually married a lawyer and moved to Sacramento. Sarah became the teacher at the Placerville schoolhouse, staying close to home and her parents. Robert, the youngest, loved the ranch as much as Samuel did, and the two brothers worked well together, planning for the day when they would run the operation jointly. Preston gradually stepped back from the daily operations, though he never fully retired. He loved the land too much, loved the work too much to ever completely leave it. In 1900, Natalie and Preston celebrated their 24th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting half the county. It was a beautiful autumn day, warm and golden, with tables set up under the oak trees and enough food to feed an army. As the celebration wound down and the last guests departed, Natalie and Preston walked together to the hillside where William and Clara were buried. They stood hand in hand, looking out over the valley they had tended for so long. "You think he would be proud?" Preston asked quietly. "Uncle William, I mean, proud of what we have done with this place." "I know he would be," Natalie said with certainty. "Look at all of this. The thriving ranch, the family, the legacy. This is exactly what he hoped for when he took you in all those years ago." And when he hired a supposed curse as his housekeeper, Preston added with a smile, "Best decision he ever made, clearly." Preston laughed and pulled her close. They were both in their 50s now, with grown children and grandchildren, with bodies that ached in the mornings and moved slower than they once had. But the love between them had only deepened with time, tempered and strengthened by years of partnership, by weathering life's challenges together. "Do you ever regret it?" Preston asked suddenly. "Not leaving when things were hard, when the whole town hated you?" Natalie was quiet for a moment, really considering the question. "No," she finally said. "Not once. If I had left, I would have missed all of this. You, our children, this life we built together. The town's hatred was painful, but it was temporary. This, what we have, this is forever." "Forever," Preston agreed, kissing her temple. They walked back to the house as the sun set, ready for whatever years remained to them, secure in the love they shared and the life they had built together. The new century brought changes to California and to Placerville. The railroad made travel easier, connecting their rural community more closely to San Francisco and the larger world. Automobiles began to appear, strange, noisy contraptions that frightened the horses. The old mining operations mostly shut down, the easy gold long since extracted, and the town reinvented itself as a trading center for the surrounding ranches and farms. Through it all, the W Ranch remained a constant, a touchstone of tradition and stability in a rapidly changing world. Samuel and Robert ran the operation now, with Preston serving as an advisor and occasional extra hand when needed. Natalie, at 66, had finally slowed down, content to tend her garden, spoil her 5 grandchildren, and enjoy the quieter rhythms of her later years. In the spring of 1905, Natalie fell ill with pneumonia. It came on suddenly, turning a simple cold into something far more serious. Preston, terrified of losing her, hardly left her bedside. Their children gathered at the ranch, and even Lucy made the trip from Sacramento. For several days, Natalie drifted in and out of consciousness, her lungs fighting for every breath. Preston held her hand through it all, talking to her even when she could not respond, reminding her of their life together, of all the reasons she needed to fight to stay with him. "Remember when we first met," he said one night, his voice hoarse from hours of talking. "You told me my horse needed a farrier, so matter-of-fact and confident even though you were terrified. I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met. I still do." Natalie's eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with difficulty. "Preston," she whispered, "I am right here, love. I am not going anywhere." "The town called me cursed," she said, each word an effort. "But I called you blessed," Preston finished, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Because you are. Because you were then and you are now. You are the blessing of my life, Natalie Walker." She managed a small smile. "And you are mine." She survived, though it took weeks of careful nursing before she was fully recovered. Preston and their children took turns caring for her, and the community rallied as well, with women bringing food and offers of help, with the doctor making daily visits and refusing payment. "You have been a blessing to this town," the doctor said when Natalie tried to insist on paying. "Let us give something back." By summer, Natalie was well enough to sit on the porch again, to enjoy the warm evenings and the company of her husband and family. She had lost weight and her hair had gone completely white, but her spirit was unbroken, her mind as sharp as ever. "You gave me quite a scare," Preston said one evening as they watched their granddaughters play in the yard. "I gave myself quite a scare," Natalie admitted. "For a while there, I thought I might actually be leaving you. Not aloud. We made a deal, remember, forever." "Forever," Natalie agreed. They had 7 more good years together, years filled with the simple pleasures of long marriage and family life. They watched their grandchildren grow, welcomed 3 more into the world, and saw Samuel and Robert expand the ranch operations into new ventures. In the winter of 1912, Preston suffered a stroke while working with the horses. He died 3 days later, surrounded by his family, with Natalie holding his hand just as he had held hers during her illness years before. "I love you," she whispered as his breathing grew shallow. "In this life and the next, Preston Walker. You took a cursed stranger and made her your blessed wife, and I have loved you every day since." His eyes met hers one final time, full of love and peace, and then he was gone. Natalie was 73 when Preston died, and she grieved him deeply. But she did not break. She had learned too much resilience over the years, had weathered too many storms to be completely undone even by this greatest of losses. She lived 4 more years, staying at the ranch she had helped build, surrounded by children and grandchildren who adored her. In the spring of 1916, as wildflowers bloomed across the valley and new calves kicked up their heels in the pastures, Natalie died peacefully in her sleep. She was buried next to Preston on the hillside overlooking the ranch, with William and Clara nearby, all of them together again in the land they had loved. At her funeral, the preacher spoke of her kindness, her strength, her contributions to the community. But it was Samuel, her eldest son, who perhaps summed her up best. "My mother came to Placerville as a stranger, alone and afraid. The town called her cursed, but my father saw the truth. He called her blessed, and he made her his wife. Together they built a legacy that will endure for generations. They built a family, a ranch, a life of purpose and love. My mother was no curse. She was a blessing to everyone who knew her, and we are all better for having had her in our lives." The Double W Ranch continued to thrive under Samuel and Robert's care, and eventually passed to Samuel's children, and then to their children. The story of Natalie and Preston became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The cursed stranger and the cowboy who saw past fear to the person beneath. The love that transformed both their lives and built something that lasted far beyond their years. In Placerville, Natalie's memory lived on as well. The schoolhouse that Sarah had taught in was renamed in Natalie's honor. Her recipes were still used in local kitchens. Her kindness was still remembered by the oldest residents, who had been children when she was in her prime. The town that had once called her cursed eventually came to recognize her as one of its finest citizens, a woman who had contributed immeasurably to the community, despite facing initial rejection and hostility. In the end, time and truth prevailed, just as Preston had always believed they would. And somewhere on a hillside in the Sierra Nevada foothills, 4 graves rested in peaceful companionship, marking the final resting place of people who had loved deeply, lived fully, and left the world better than they found it. The cursed stranger and the cowboy who called her blessed, together forever in the land they had made their own.